They say a heart doesn't break in thunder. It breaks in carpeted rooms under soft light, in the polite silence after an ugly joke. Mine fractured under chandeliers that pretended to be stars. It started with the kind of laughter that depends on a target. It ended with the quietest "enough" I've ever heard, and the sound of a ring clicking once against glass like a dropped coin in a church. The gala was a ribbon of gold, city leaders, camera flashes, champagne pretending to be joy. I had a voice trained for rooms like this, laced with confidence, quick enough to skim over shame. The campaign I'd led was on everyone's lips. My name was threaded into their compliments. I floated, buoyed by a tide of admiration I'd chased for so long that stillness felt like drowning. Naveen stood at the edge of it all. One shoulder leaned against a column as if the building needed steadying, and he volunteered. He had a gentle way of occupying space. He never demanded a laugh, never sharpened a story to stab. His shirt was a dark navy, lint brushed away with the kind of patience that fixes small things because the big things can't be fixed right now. His eyes found me, then drifted, as if unwilling to cage me with concern. I saw him, noted the steadiness, and went back to the circle of people who sharpened sentences for a living. Someone joked about partners who don't get it, the way civilians don't understand combat. It was easy to slip into that current, to say the funny thing that makes the group feel like a secret. Naveen. He still uses a paper planner, I said, an affectionate curl placed carefully over the mockery. When I said we went viral, he asked if he should call a doctor. The laugh came like a small explosion, bright, hollowing. I felt the hit in him from across the room, the way a violin feels the room tense before the bow draws. He didn't flinch. He set his glass down on the tray of a passing server, thanked the server with his whole face, and walked toward me. The group opened, the music dulled, the chandeliers hummed as if begging us to be softer. "Arya," he said, my name landing clean. I smiled, muscle memory. He tilted his head just slightly, the way he did when the kettle announced itself, when he found the first jasmine bloom on the balcony vine. "Don't," he said gently. It wasn't a reprimand. It was a request we'd never rehearsed. "Don't smile to fix it." My throat staged a rebellion. "It was a joke," I offered, because what else do people with knives for tongues say when someone bleeds? His hands were empty. He wasn't holding the glass, his phone, his keys, only the decision he had been carving quietly for months. "I know," he said, and the way he looked at me made the room tilt. "It's almost always a joke." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't perform. He simply set something down between us that could only be lifted by both our hands. "I can't be your punchline," he said. "Not again. Not while calling it love." The word love landed like a small animal, wary, unwilling to come when called. The people around us learned sudden humility. Their eyes found their drinks, their shoes, the way light pools around cruelty and then recoils. "Let's talk at home," I said, an old trick promised privacy to postpone accountability. He shook his head. "I'm not going home." The sentence had been built plank by plank, weathered, tested. "I packed a bag," he added, as if he owed the truth a timestamp. I wanted to say it was dramatic. I wanted to laugh it off, soften the edges with wit. The humor abandoned me like a fair-weather friend. "I am sorry," I said, the words too fresh, unseasoned. They fell heavy, ungainly. He nodded, honoring their effort. "I believe you," he said. "I also believe myself." Then, with the softest voice that ever knocked down a room, "Enough." He glanced at my colleagues, the ones who would turn anything into content. "You don't have to follow me out," he added, kind to the end. "You can finish your story." He turned and moved toward the exit. I stood in a dress that suddenly felt like a costume I could not unzip, a staging of a woman who wins. I watched his back, broad, familiar, the place my palms used to rest when mornings were humane, and felt a soundless scream gather in my bones. The applause began across the room for someone else's achievement. It reached me delayed, meaningless. I placed my glass on the nearest surface and missed by an inch. Champagne slid down the tablecloth, a small failing in a room built to hide them. Leela, my second-in-command and chief witness, touched my forearm with careful fingers. "Do you need me?" she asked softly, the way she had learned to speak around glass. "No," I lied, reflex. Then, "Yes." "Cover the rest." Her eyes flicked to the door, then back. "Go," she said, the single most loving command I could have received. I walked, every step an argument with habit, every breath a trial. Outside, the night was slick and loud. A violinist on the corner made the rain feel staged. I didn't see Naveen. The curb was a parade of cars swallowing couples. I lifted my phone. The screen was a sheet of cold light. I typed and erased and typed and erased until the taxi headlights turned the world into a confession. Finally, "Please." I sent the one-word prayer to a man who had stopped treating my emergencies as sacred. He did not reply. Silence isn't empty. It's a room where all the unsaid finally sit down. At home, his side of the closet was polite in its vacancy. Hangers like ribs, a sweater sleeve caught between two doors like a held breath. On the dresser, a folded note in his simple hand. "Keys with Ran. Water the basil. Do not apologize to a voicemail." Ran was his brother, the practical one who patched drywall without comment. Basil was the stubborn plant he coaxed back from the edge every winter. The voicemail was the altar I would be tempted to build. I sat on the bedroom rug and learned what a heartbeat sounds like when it's a hammer. The basil drooped like a warning. The apartment had been arranged to pretend at belonging. Our shoes aligned like cooperative soldiers, the bookshelf sorted by tenderness and accidents. Without him, the rooms developed an echo. My reflection in the hallway mirror looked like a person cosplaying competence. I watered the basil and watched the soil darken as if receiving last rites. It wasn't dead. Yet, Naveen's absence became topography. The mug with the chipped rim sat on the counter, its flaw like a dimple. The tea tin labeled "Everyday" was lighter by the weight of his habit. The quilt he mended with an ugly stitch because mending belonged to use, not to aesthetics, lay folded at the bed's edge. I traced the seam with my finger and tried to conjure his hands, steady, warm, less prone to proof. I didn't know where he went. Rand didn't answer my text, which meant he had been instructed not to. This was not a game. This was a boundary. I put my phone face down and discovered I still had a pulse. I made the mistake of opening my laptop and found emails like gravel, updates, invites, numbers that proved what a quarter thinks success means. I closed the machine as if shutting a door on a child playing with knives. I walked the city to burn off the part of me that buzzed like bad lighting. I passed couples with careful laughter, a man teaching his daughter to jump over cracks with single-minded devotion, a woman in a sari the color of marigold stepping around a puddle like a queen avoiding an insult. The world kept doing its useless miracles. I wanted to hate it for not halting. On the third day, my mother called. She wrote worry in her voice the way some people write their names in wet cement, visible, permanent. "You sound tired," she said. I laughed, horrifying both of us. "I sound like I deserve it," I replied and immediately wished I could scoop the sentence back into my mouth. "Come home," she said. We both knew she meant my childhood apartment with the peeling blue paint and the plastic stool in the kitchen that held our entire history. "Soon," I said, and meant never until I meant yes. The first panic attack arrived like a malicious guest, late, loud, indifferent to my plans. I was at the office pretending to eat a salad while actually chewing on the past. The room tilted. My hands forgot their domestic tasks. The air got stingy. I closed my door and sat on the carpet and remembered the breathing exercise Naveen had taught me in a grocery store once when a stranger's anger had filled the aisle. "In 4, out 6, he'd said then, counting softly, a metronome for mercy. I tried it now. By the 5th round, the floor returned to its rightful job. I wrote him a letter, on paper, with a pen that sometimes skipped. I wrote like a person who believed ink could purify intention. "I made you small in rooms where I felt big," I wrote. "I turned love into a performance and cast you as the straight man. I know what I did. I know it doesn't untie the knots in your chest." I did not ask him to come back. I did not offer promises I hadn't rehearsed. I placed the letter under the basil, a ridiculous altar to growth. Days folded into a bleak origami that looked like a bird, and did not fly. I found myself at the community center 2 blocks from our place, because I remembered he volunteered on Saturdays teaching meditation to whoever showed up. Auto mechanics with soft eyes, nurses with stiff backs, teenagers who sat in the corner and pretended to hate everything. The room smelled like Lysol and new effort. A woman at the desk looked up. "Can I help you?" I hadn't planned a story. "I'm looking for time," I said. She didn't laugh. "Aren't we all?" she answered and handed me a schedule. On the bulletin board a flyer. Breath plus stillness, 2/Thurs 6:30 p.m. Naveen Shah. My name didn't belong to his schedule anymore, but my body belonged to gravity. I stood in the doorway Tuesday at 6:31, prepared to run. He wasn't there. A man with a beanie and a warm voice was reading from a note card. "Naveen is away, I'm covering." I stayed. I sat on a cheap yoga mat beside the woman with marigolds on her sari, or her cousin, or a stranger who borrowed her color. The breath did what it does when it's asked nicely. After the man in the beanie said, "You knew," I nodded. "First time." He smiled like he'd been told to be gentle with people who walk in already broken. "We hand out notes," he said, and slipped me a small card. On it in neat print, "Make a room for your breath, it will fill it. Then widen the room." The font was Naveen's teacher voice. I held the card the way you hold a warm stone, both comfort and weight. Home, I moved through the apartment as if the air had changed pressure. I opened windows. The city's hum braided itself with my quieter pulse. I watered the basil correctly, deeply once, then leave it alone. I wrote myself instructions on a post-it because I am the kind of person who believes sentences can trap better versions of us. I taped the note on the pantry door. Then I sat at the kitchen table and whispered "enough" into the wood grain, trying to learn the shape of a word that had spared us a dozen uglier ones. Life resumed its ordinary tyrannies. Deadlines, a cracked phone screen that cut my cheek, the dishwasher's sudden insistence on singing. I became a student of small mercies. I learned the names of the neighbors' dogs, made eye contact with the man who sweeps our building's front steps at 6 in the morning, tipped the barista even when the oat milk bombed my coffee. Guilt tried to make these into penance. I refused it that power. I practiced kindness because it is a muscle, because returning a grocery cart deserves ceremony. I failed, often. At the weekly status meeting, a junior copywriter mixed up figures, and I felt the old blade unsheathe in my throat. The cutting line arrived immaculate, cruel. I saw his fingers fumble with the trackpad and thought of Naveen's hands folding a note exactly in half. The joke curdled in my mouth. I swallowed and said, "Slow down, we'll get it right." The room did not applaud this revolutionary act. The junior copywriter's shoulders unhooked themselves from his ears. That was enough. Sundays I went to the community center. Beanie guy Diego, I learned, played recordings of Naveen reading small instructions. "If your mind bolts, be kind to your inner horse," one said. Someone snorted. Another said he would. And a woman in scrubs whispered, "It helped." I kept my eyes closed as if my lids could keep me humble. After class, Diego mentioned a fundraiser, leaky roof, expensive, winter coming. He said it casually, the way people do when they don't want to weaponize need. I said, "We can make noise." I am very good at that. I pitched a modest campaign to my team, "Give quiet a home." We designed posters with soft shades and words you had to stand close to read. We recorded testimonies with no background music. We asked local businesses for matching funds, and they said yes because the pitch wasn't flashy. It was human. I emailed Leela at midnight with the subject line, "For once this." She replied, "Proud of you." I cried into a sweater sleeve and then slept like a person who had stopped turning knives into lullabies. Mid-month, I met Ran in the produce aisle as if fate had read my grocery list. He stood considering tomatoes with the seriousness he brought to appliances. "Ran," I said. He looked at me and his face did me the mercy of not becoming a lecture. "You okay?" he asked, the family's economy with words intact. "No," I said. He nodded because of course. He set a tomato back down. "He's at my place," he said before I could ask. "He's not hiding, he's resting." My chest found a new shape. "Can I?" I started, aiming for ask, hitting beg. Rand lifted a hand. "Not yet." Then softer, "He reads the mail. He saw the fundraiser." I smiled despite myself. "We're making noise for quiet." Rand grunted approval. "He'll like that." He leaned closer, conspiratorial. "He left you a book on my counter, said you might come by for it. Only a monster leaves a book as bait." I laughed. "Wrong then, right?" "What book?" Rand shrugged. "Something about bread." I blinked. "He doesn't bake." Rand's mouth tilted. "No," he said. "But he knows how to feed people." At the center, we put up a poster by the door where everyone had to pause to read. "Give quiet a home." The director, a woman with hair like an argument, hugged me. "You're absolutely shameless," she said, weeping. "In the service of Roof," I replied. We nodded like generals. Navin didn't appear. He existed in threads: Diego's phone, Rand's stoicism, the notes in my pocket. The ache was a manageable animal now. It slept sometimes. I went to Rand's on a Saturday with a bag of oranges because I was raised correctly. He opened the door in socks, a power move. "He's out," Rand said, and stepped aside anyway. The apartment was neat in that way men achieve when they respect objects. On the counter, a paperback called The Blessing of Bread. On the cover, a cracked loaf and hands that looked like they could fix sinks. A note on top in Navin's hand. The recipe in the back. Page 217, "Feed yourself slowly." I stood in Rand's tiny kitchen and felt a laugh grow in me like a responsible storm. Page 217 was a simple holla, no frills, patient with human timing. "You going to take it?" Rand asked, as if I might leave it behind as a vow of virtue. "Yes," I said, and tucked the book under my arm like a child. Rand walked me to the door. "He's not angry like you think," he said as I laced my boots. "He's cleaning his house." I nodded. "So am I." Rand's eyes softened. "Good," he said. "Clean it for yourself." At home, I measured flour like a prayer. I kneaded until my shoulders were both complaint and gratitude. I set the dough in a bowl and let it expand like a better idea. I braided clumsily, the strands uneven, and let the oven take it anyway. The smell marched through the apartment and lifted whatever grief hadn't sat down yet. When I cut the first slice, steam curled like forgiveness. I ate with butter on my fingers and crumbs on my chin, and for once didn't apologize to anyone for kneading. When the fundraiser ended, the Roof had enough for winter. The director sent me a photo of a bucket retired from its second career as rain catcher. I printed it and taped it on the fridge beside a list in Navin's handwriting that read, "Basil, onions, mercy." I didn't remember him writing that last word. He could have. He wrote like that, little riddles he never demanded I solve. The first time I saw him after the gala was accidental by design. I went to the farmer's market because it was apple season, and I am not immune to Instagram's annual hymn. He stood at a stall inspecting Honeycrisps like diamonds, thumb pressing gently near the stem to test for sincerity. He wore a sweater I'd never seen and a face I recognized. Wary, unarmed, mid-repair, I considered flight. I considered theater. I chose walking. Navin. His name tasted like something warm I'd let go cold. He looked up, surprise folding into something else. Arya. We both laughed at the equality of it. We exchanged hello like people in the same town after a storm. The vendor, bored of our restraint, bagged apples and interrupted, "You two together." Navin and I shared a glance that contained an ocean and a small dinghy. "We're good neighbors," I said. The vendor snorted. "So the apples won't fight," he said. It broke something stiff. We both smiled. "Coffee?" he asked, as if suggesting we try a common language at a volume the world could tolerate. The cart on the corner steamed like a patient beast. We stood side by side, not touching, and watched the man pour. Navin paid because he had always insisted that generosity is not a competition. We walked to the edge of the park where a group of children tackled a soccer ball with a theology that equated joy and chaos. "How's the Roof?" he asked. I told him. I told him about Give Quiet a Home and how Diego called me general of soft things. He smiled, unguarded. "You'd be a good general," he said. "You know strategy." "I'm learning surrender," I replied. We watched a boy spin until he fell and then laugh at the sky as if apologizing for gravity's rudeness. I've been cooking badly, I confessed, because truth had begun to pay dividends. Bread, things with eggs, anything with onions. Onions are faithful, he said. They show up, they don't try to be something else. I laughed. Are we talking about onions? Always, he said, straight-faced. Then softer, you look different. I waited for the modifier, better, worse, tired, thinner. He refused to grade me. You look like you're breathing. We walked, the long loop, our feet remembering how to keep company without stepping on each other's shadows. He told me he was staying with Ran because Ran's place listens. I let that be both a description and a poem. I told him the basil was rallying, that I had learned the schedule for its thirst. We spoke of the community center like a shared child receiving therapy. He said, "Thank you," in the tone of someone who wasn't done thanking. "I wrote you a letter," I said as we reached the statue of a general on a horse who probably didn't deserve a plaza. "I didn't send it." "Good," he said, and then, "Not because I don't want your words, because I want the ones that survive your edit." I nodded, newly fluent in that dialect. "I want to show you something," he added, then waited as if I should have consent to be shown. "Okay," I said, and found myself relieved that he asked. We went to the studio in the old shoe warehouse where he rented space sometimes for his mindfulness group when the center smelled too much like floor polish. The room was industrial tenderness, bricks that remembered factory sweat, windows that could stomach the city honestly. On a low table, he had arranged a collection of objects that made a small museum of purpose. A broken ceramic cup glued meticulously, a stone with a vein of white running through it like a repaired river, a handful of letters addressed to no one and everyone. "Wabi sabi," he said, not as a flex, but as a way to invite me into a word. "The beauty in the imperfect, the crack that lets the light out." He lifted the mended cup and turned it in his hands. The gold seam caught the late sun and threw it back kindly. "I've been practicing not fixing," he said, "just honoring, letting the brokenness be part of it, not a war." My chest went tight in the old way and then softened. "I've been practicing not cutting," I replied. "It is harder than it looks." He set the cup down with a care that refused performance. "We are both learning," he said. We didn't decide anything that day. We stood in a room with broken things that refused to apologize and watched the light learn how to rest. When we parted, he pressed a small stone into my palm without explaining it. It had a line of white through its center, a scar, a horizon. "For your pocket," he said, "when your mouth wants to run faster than your heart." I closed my fingers around it and discovered it fit. We built something awkward and resilient, a bridge just wide enough for two careful people carrying fragile cargo. We met for tea. We sent photos of sunsets that didn't lie. We shared grocery lists. His a hymn to ingredients, mine a ransom note composed by a stressed executive finally learning to eat. I told him the board wanted me to pitch a campaign for a luxury watch that cost more than the community center's roof. He didn't tell me what to do. He asked, "What story does that watch tell?" I said, "That time belongs to rich men." He said, "Then sell them a mirror." I resigned the pitch. I didn't make a speech. I used the time to write an apology email to my team for the weeks I had been impossible. The night Ran hosted Diwali, I went because his mother had texted me a photo of laddus with the caption, "Enough for 10 girlfriends." It was a trap wrapped in sugar. The apartment pulsed with a warmth I knew how to counterfeit on social media, and did not know how to hold in my hands without trembling. Naveen stood in the kitchen rolling puris like a person on a mission from God. We moved around each other with the choreography of people who have shared sinks. His mother, the general of this army, pressed a diya into my palm. "For light," she said, meaning a dozen things. After dessert, she cornered me with a plate and her physician's gaze. "You are thinner," she declared, a statement not a compliment. "Eat more." Then, lowering her voice, "Hurt less. The force of being mothered by the mother of a man you have wounded is a gentle bulldozer." I nodded and ate, and she watched like a hawk who believes in dietary redemption. Naveen caught my eye and smirked. It was an old smirk. It landed in a new place. We walked home together carrying surplus sweets, the city a scatter of lanterns. Your mother examined my soul through my ribs, I said. She likes you, he answered. She thinks you listen when corrected. I huffed. Tell her it's a recent development. He laughed and the night brightened. We stopped on the footbridge over the avenue because the traffic beneath sounded like complicated applause. Arya, he said, and the word brought me to attention. I'm proud of you. I didn't cry, I breathed. For what? He considered. For wanting what costs you. The next week, the agency's founder pulled me into a conference room and offered me the creative director role I had daydreamed about on trains, in bathrooms, during dental cleanings. It arrived wrapped in velvet and vultures. You've earned it, he said, and listed awards like beads. You'll need to be sharper, he added, almost kindly, like an uncle suggesting diets. The old machine word. The sharpness hummed in me, eager. I pictured the community center's roof. I pictured the boy who spun until he fell and laughed at the sky's insistence. I pictured Navin's stone in my pocket warming against my skin. I'll do it differently, I said, or I won't do it. He blinked, recalibrated, found a new script. Differently, he agreed. I led the team like a person with dimmer switches, testing brightness before blinding the room. We made work that didn't humiliate. It was slower. It was better. Some clients left because they wanted campaigns that weaponized envy. Others came because they wanted to sell things without setting fires they could not put out later. At reviews, I said the radical sentence, I was wrong. The juniors learned faster. The seniors resisted, then softened. Leela, watching me like a friend and a scientist, texted at midnight, look at you, not burning. I saw Navin more. He didn't move back in. We weren't performing reunion for an audience that had already purchased confetti. We were near. He helped me install shelves that didn't sag. I helped him write a grant application for his meditation program using verbs that tasted less like sermons. We failed each other in small ways, a forgotten text, a late arrival, and apologized with complete sentences. We slept together once, then didn't again for a while by mutual consent, holding the desire like a candle not meant to burn the house down. On a Saturday, we took the train upstate to a lake that had survived too many postcard photographers. We rented a rowboat from a man whose left eyebrow had retired. We rowed badly, then well. In the middle, we stopped and let the boat decide how to move. Do you want to come home? I asked, because bravery is sometimes a question. Navin rested the oars across his knees. The water practiced being a mirror. Not yet, he said, honest as rain. But I want to keep walking in that direction. It was enough. It was everything. We did not announce our healing. We did not live stream redemption. We gathered small proof and let it accumulate like winter sunlight on a kitchen floor. He kept his bag at Rand's. I kept a spare toothbrush in a drawer just in case we forgot to plan. We learned to make dal 2 ways and argued about the proper number of cloves. We attended a neighbor's birthday party and left early without inventing an excuse. We kept promises the way some people keep bees, carefully, respecting stings as part of the practice. In February, the community center hosted a gratitude night to show donors the roof and the retired bucket. Navin spoke last. He stood in front of a folding table draped with a clean sheet and said, I thought I had to be loud to be heard. Turns out I had to be honest. The room murmured in agreement not because it was clever, but because it was true. I took photos and did not post them. I put my phone away and listened to the radiator hiss like a satisfied dragon. That night he came over with a paper bag that held lemons and mercy. I taught a kid to name his feelings today, he said, setting things on the counter that weren't groceries. He chose colors. He said his anger is red, but not the bad red, more like tomato. I imagined a small boy saving himself with vocabulary. What color is your sadness? I asked. Navin thought. Blue with gold seams. I understood. Kintsugi, I said. Wabai sabai, he corrected. Both, we agreed, because marriage to ideas is sometimes easier than marriage to people. We sat on the floor and planned a lamp for Mrs. D'Souza next door whose eyes tired easily. He sketched, I described. We laughed when the shade looked like a hat. We argued kindly about switch height. The apartment felt like a studio where no one would be fired for mistakes. "Do you remember the gala?" he asked suddenly, the way a body flinches when a scar is touched. "Every second," I said. "I have replayed it so often I started to learn the choreography." He nodded. "I'm not doing that replay anymore." I exhaled. "Me neither." Spring arrived late and petty. We ignored it and made our own rituals. On Sundays, we ate bread I had learned to braid evenly. On Wednesdays, he sent me a line from a poem, and I sent him a word I'd misused that day and what I'd meant instead. On Fridays, we practiced silence for an hour in the living room with the dimmers at Perceptive. It felt like church without the shame. One evening we sat on the fire escape because the day was too full for walls. Naveen pointed to a window across the alley where a woman in a red dress danced with a broom as if floors need affection to shine. "What if this is it?" he asked, not resignation, curiosity. This as in no wedding date, no third-party validation, no ring that clicks against glass. Just showing up with lemons when needed and leaving on time. I felt the old need to draft a plan. I set it down. "Then this is a life," I said, "and I'm in it." We didn't speak of forever. We spoke of next week. We spoke of the basil and the boy with tomato anger and the woman with the broom. We spoke of the lamp that cast gentle circles on a neighbor's table and how circles are stubborn about not being corners. We spoke of bread and breathing and enough. In late May, we went to the sea. Not the expensive part with curated sunsets, the honest part where families eat too much and aunties tell the ocean secrets. We sat with our shoes off and let the sand steal what it wanted. The water kept doing its translation work. Naveen took the stone with the white seam out of my pocket and set it between us. "We could make it official," he said without looking at me. He meant marriage, but also something less ceremonial and equally binding. The decision to keep the brutal honesty and the dim lights and the refusal to sacrifice each other to a joke. "I want to keep what we built," I said, the sentence lined with slow-made courage. "Even if we change the shape." He nodded. "We will." He didn't ask for an answer beyond that. He knew we had years of a question turned into a machine. He refused to wind it up. We sat and watched a child in yellow chase seagulls and fail joyfully and chase again. When we left, I tucked the stone into his pocket instead. "For your mouth when your heart wants to run," I said, mangling the line on purpose because I am still me. He smiled, small and devastating. "For my pocket," he said, and tapped his chest. We walked back along the boardwalk where old men played chess like surgeons and teenagers kissed like tourists. We didn't hold hands. We didn't need to. The air around us was enough. A week later, he moved his bag back into the closet. Not with music, not with declarations. He hung the sweaters. He placed the socks. He put the toothbrush in the cup and it didn't look like an invasion. He patted the basil like a pet and said, "Alive." We stood there in a room we had nearly taught to hate us and felt its relief. He touched the dimmer, watched the light lower to the right kind of yes, and nodded like a craftsman inspecting a joint. "Good," he said, as if approving a beam. "Good," I answered, and for once the word was not a performance, it was a measurement. We didn't return to the gala circuit. We returned to the community center, the farmer's market, the fire escape. We hosted dinner where the menu was mercy and rice. We learned again and again to call each other by name and mean it. When I slipped, "Because I do," he said, "Arya," gently, and I heard the careful stop in it. When he withdrew, "Because he does," I said, "Naveen," kindly, and he returned. We had built a room for our breath. It widened, we let it. We had built a room for our breath. It widened, we let it.